Welcome to Meet the Makers. I'm Julie Smithson, co-founder of Metaverse, co-founder of XR Women, and host of the Polly's WebXR Awards. Our team brought you the WebXR Summit Series and Meta Traversal Initiative, and now Meet the Makers. If you aren't familiar with the term prompt engineering, just ask an AI to explain it to you. Seriously, it's a thing now, as you've likely heard. Ivo Heining is an accomplished producer who has contributed generously to the discourse in our community around ethics with the XR Guild, also around cooperation on standards with OMI, the Open Metaverse Interoperability Group, and leading the Meta Traversal Initiative, advocating for portal interoperability across platforms. She's the author of the book Promptcraft and founder of the Reality Craft Studio. Ivo is both a student and teacher of the AI game, practicing the craft of seeding and refining prompts to generate text, images, music, and video. You know where all of this is going. We're already seeing generative AI building immersive spaces, and it will accelerate the evolution of the metaverse itself. In our next segment, meet Ivo Heining, producer and prompt engineer, sharing her story.
I began my creative path in immersive worlds, XR, virtual spaces in the 90s. I had been a coder all the way back to being a 6-year-old and also an artist. So when I became a creative technologist, it was in the context of working in nonprofit organizations. And so I started in interactive media to fundraise, to raise $1 million to solve a problem, to build a bear sanctuary. We made the first online charity auction with eBay. We convinced eBay to do it, and then we raised money and built a bear sanctuary. After 9/11, I quit my broadcast media job and I went to teach. And it was around that time that I got very engaged with social impact networks, and specifically early sustainability movements and these sort of change agent groups. And one of those groups invited me, it was through a group called the Omidyar Network, to participate in Second Life, and specifically to create there in terms of something we called the Better World Island. So that was my first jump into virtual spaces, creating virtual worlds for education, for telling difficult stories. I liked creating spaces that you couldn't get to in the physical world. We started creating experiences that reflected the difficult stories of people in displacement camps. For example, those leaving the Sudan who were currently living in displacement camps, telling their own stories through immersive spaces. I could see how this was a rich space for nonprofits to work together. So I found the folks at TechSoup and a woman named Beth Cantor and a few of my other sort of nonprofit changemaker friends. And the Nonprofit Commons created official virtual office spaces for hundreds of nonprofit organizations to collaborate and work together and meet together on a regular basis. And this was the beginning of a place for representation, for example, for the Transgender Resource Center to provide support services. Communities, for example, Native American diaspora, creating ritual spaces and places that were a place to gather for those who were no longer on their tribal lands. We began looking at how do you connect the community layer with the local, the national, and the international layers. Now, most people haven't had the opportunity yet to think about all of those connection points as part of a connected whole, right? We had some goofy language for this in the 90s, right? Like cyberspace. But the metaverse became one of those terms that helped encompass what that digital space could be. It's not a perfect word, obviously, but it helps people understand that the future of our 3D and 4D interconnected world is both digital and it connects to the physical. It is interactive, but it is also transactive. It includes all of the things that we engage with in our daily lives. Some of those are around creating consistency. Some of those are around creating embodiment. For example, having a beautiful avatar that people recognize when you go into a space, so that I know every time I see you, you're the one in the shiniest coat in the room because I know you. I know that that's your character. And I'm writing a book right now. The second in the Reality Craft series is specifically focused on those creative capacities to create the worlds we want to see in the future, right? So thinking about the futures we want, not just the futures that have been told to us, right? The dystopian ideas and all of these kind of dark old stories that are boring. That is not the future we want. We have had a shortage of great imagination when it comes to positive futures. For example, with our relationships with AI, there are very few protopian stories about symbiosis with collective intelligences, AGI, and a wide variety of symbiotic intelligences that are already all around us. We just haven't figured out how to tell the right story around it. Figuring out how to unlock those doors and then provide keys to each other to say, here, let's pursue this path instead. If you think about where we've come in the web over the last 30 years, we've come a long way. We can work on real-time collaborative efforts together in both 2D and now in 3D. Where are we going to take that? How are we going to apply those skills? And what does it mean to do that wisely together? And so there was nowhere to have that conversation about ethical engagement, design choices that might leak out data in 3D, 4D, and out there into the world. So XR Guild was formed over the past year and a half. We are over a year in now, specifically to address not just the ethical inquiries, but how we do that inquiry process together, how we take that back into the boardroom and into the design process, but also how we engage our peers in asking questions about data and consent, research and development, figuring out whether a product choice is appropriate and whether it's something we should be putting out into the world. But also as something that we would now call generative, that would use the tools of AI along with participatory creation to build a world that is evolving in real time with the prompted ideas of the people in that space. If you think of nature, if you think of all of the different ways nature is aware and conscious of us in some way, that could look like many different forms of life. Trees, mycelial networks, animals, right? Each of these things has a different form of intelligence. We relate to each of them differently. And so too, our relationships with ANI, with narrow intelligences that, artificial is probably not the right word for, but these deep learning programs that we are now using as part of our creative toolkit, all of those tools are being assembled in real time together. We are all doing this massive participatory creative experiment. We are all sitting here sharpening our knives together to say, okay, I now want to be able to speak a sculpture. I want to speak a world into existence. So what does it mean to speak a world into existence, or to go straight from your imagination to something that can be potentially walked through and realized and made real for people? Right now, we're at our infancy, not just with immersive tools and the metaverse, but with generative tools. We're like in our playpens playing with these tiny little toys, and we know that our tiny little car is eventually going to drive us across the universe, but it's not going to get there anytime soon. And we are infants in this space. We're just figuring out how to use our tools effectively together. So I love creating communities that are valuable, meaningful, fun. I'm finishing up an album right now that's all generative lyrics combined with human music. We're working with amazing Grammy Award-winning musical artists combined with generative tools to create music videos that are fun and surreal and playful, and that are also a little bit bendy, right? We're bending the rules of reality a little bit. We're playing with the edges. And so I love creating in that space. I love inviting other people to create into that space. Even as I'm creating a music project, I'm creating a graphic novel based on those stories I wrote back in 2006. All of these pieces later on converge, and they converge in the immersive. What you're seeing here is a mix of generative video, primarily from images that were created both from my existing artwork and using Midjourney, and then mixing those in tools such as Kyber and Runway, a handful of other tools used here. But in my generative media experiments, I've been running basically comparative tests in, I think, about 120 tools so far. For the music videos, I'll be using about a dozen of those. And then in the world building side, I've tested 4 or 5 different world building tools in addition to the 3D design tools. So eventually this will come together into a 3D concept album where the videos create one layer of the experience along with the immersive experience as well. So when you're thinking about how do these kinds of experiences come together, it often starts with an idea. In this case, the idea then went into both generative tools as I was refining the lyrics to the song. This particular song is about being stardust and how we are all connected, whether it's AI and digital or human or other forms of life. And so thinking about these big picture connections and how they change us, how they affect us, and what those relationships look like in our daily life. So what is the role of collaborative creativity in this space? It's figuring out how do we, you and I as human beings, choose to play together? How do we choose to interact in a way that is consent driven, that is appropriate for you and for me, that creates something maybe better than the sum of our parts, right? Maybe we are contributing to the betterment of society, or at least our little corner of it somehow. There's infinite ways those pro-social ideas, how do we care for each other? How do we create space for ritual, heritage, history, all of the things that are meaningful to us, right? The web is no longer something over there that we look at. The web is the thing that we're walking through and in, right? It's no longer a flat thing on a screen. It is the holographic experience. It is moving from 3D to 4D. And interoperability, the work of making sure that those connection points work for everyone, not just for me, not just for someone who happens to have a device like a VR headset or a lot of money and a good server, but for everyone. What does it take to create that open, level playing field where, just like the web works today, that it's an accessible space for collaboration, like a public commons, like a park? Open metaverse interoperability conversations, and even when we're doing experiments like Metatraversal. And Metatraversal is a movement toward interoperability that drives a very specific type of engagement and agreement. So we recognized pretty early on in the pandemic that there were certain promises of the metaverse that were not going to be realized and certainly not realized by one company and one organization. When it comes to being able to move from one platform to another, that is often the work of larger groups like standards bodies. And so figuring out what are the connection points and how do we make those agreements together, that was the work that MetaTraversal started. Over the last 2 years, we've gathered 7, 8 times now. We've put on a play together showing the movement between AR, VR, and XR on stage. But also, we've done these portal crawls, which have been a very interesting experiment for a group of people to move across the metaverse together. And if you're thinking about what the future of the 3D web looks like, it is these communities of people who learn to move together effectively. When all of these layers in the stack add up, when MetaTraversal opens portals between web worlds the same way we click on a link today and we know it's going to take us to that other website, we know that those portals are beginning to open up doors between our worlds, that we do not have to be stuck to a single platform, a single walled garden, or a single perspective.
I just love seeing all this creativity unleashed, and Evo is right there on the vanguard of using these tools. Thank you so much, Evo.